I'm Abby Gordon, here with a book review video, and this week we are going to be reviewing the American Transcendentalists' essential writings. So Transcendentalism, you may be wondering, is a philosophical movement mostly centered in New England, which encourages seeking answers to philosophical questions in nature rather than religion. So the famous followers are Emerson, its pioneer, Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Amos Bronson Alcott, among others. And all of these people published in The Dial, their magazine, which was edited by Margaret Fuller, who I mentioned. Anyways, the origins of Transcendentalism. Well, Ralph Waldo Emerson did create it and come up with the manifesto. He was also greatly influenced by his aunt, Mary Moody Emerson. She wrote him a lot while he was at Harvard Divinity School. Very much influenced his ideas for Transcendentalism. However, she was a very religious woman herself, and therefore she disapproved of her nephew coming up with this new philosophical movement that really set aside religion. So Ralph Waldo Emerson praised her as actually one of the greatest writers, I believe. Hang on. One of the greatest prose stylists of her day. So she writes very beautifully. I would recommend finding some of her letters online, as they're honestly gorgeous, but you can really see in these writings just how much her ideas influenced him. She writes in this letter from January 18th, 1821, "The spirits of inspiration are abroad tonight. I have rode only to go out and see the wondrous aspect of nature. We love nature, to individuate ourselves in her wildest moods, to partake of her extension, and glow with her colors and fly on her winds. But we better love to cast her off, and rely only on that which is imperishable." Shakespeare has admirably described the universal influence of the infinite spirit by that of the sun, whose light and warmth brings to maturity the healthiest plant and the most poisonous, corrupts the corruptible, and nourishes the splendid tribe of flora with the same beam. What an illustration, and of what a truth! Right and wrong have had claims prior to all rights, immutable and eternal in their nature. So if we're to break that down, you can really see her influence on Ralph Waldo Emerson's love of nature. She speaks of, she very plainly says she went out only to see nature, and we love nature, and how nature benefits us as people. It's very easy to see how Emerson would have appreciated her actual physical writing as well as the ideas in it. Speaking of Emerson, I would like to turn to the next passage I would like to turn to is actually his manifesto of Transcendentalism. It's the manifesto of Transcendentalism, entitled Nature, written in 1836. So it's broken down into an introduction and 8 other chapters. Each is a couple pages long. They vary, though. Emerson speaks of, in the introduction, he speaks of how the current generation is living off the ideas of the older generation, and it's time for this current generation to come into their own and come up with their own ideas, their own philosophies. He says that the generation should have a poetry and philosophy of insight and not tradition, which, I mean, it is the definition of his transcendentalism. This is him making that declaration and really, putting his ideas out there into the world. So chapter 1 does not have a title. It kind of it very much details the following chapters. So Emerson opens with the line, "To go into solitude, a man needs to retire as much from his chamber as from society," meaning that one can only achieve solitude when surrounded by nature, by isolating yourself within Mother Nature to absorb her lessons. He says that nature never wears a mean appearance. So he really, really believes that it's good for people to be in nature and that it is the answer to many of our questions, many of our issues. It's all in nature. He also talks about people's relationship to nature. He makes the case that not many adults can actually see nature. They have a very superficial view of it. Well, the sun illuminates only the eye of man, but shines into the eye and the heart of the child. Chapter 2 of his doctrine is then entitled Commodity. He writes, "Whoever considers the final cause of the world will discern a multitude of uses that enter as parts into the result. They all admit of being thrown into one of the following classes: commodity, beauty, language, and discipline." That particular paragraph is him outlining his intention for the rest of the paragraph. So, as I said, chapter 2 is entitled Commodity, chapter 3 is entitled Beauty, 4 is Language, and 5 is Discipline. Yes. And then after that, he kind of delves off a little more into other ideas of this philosophy, but these particular 5 chapters he kind of outlines here. So by commodity, he means the ways in which nature helps us. So he talks about how everything kind of works in a cycle to keep Earth in the state that it's in. So the wind blows the seeds off the trees and into the fields, and the sun comes down and makes water evaporate, which then condenses somewhere. It can be all the way across the world and comes down to nourish those seeds, which grow, which feed the animals and people. It really speaks of this cycle that just keeps everything in a balance. It's an idea that, again, we all work together. So it is certain that the power to produce this delight does not reside in nature, but in man, or in a harmony of both. So this really speaks to the harmony of both aspect of that quote. So chapter 3, as I said earlier, is entitled Beauty, which is a nobler want of man is served by nature, namely the love of beauty. So he's saying that we need to look at nature. We need to be able to see nature to feel happiness, because nature is so beautiful that it makes us feel happy. So he breaks that down into a couple sections, 3, I believe, 3 sections, yes. He breaks that down into just into looking at nature as a whole makes us happy, and that being around nature can restore us to a happy state when we're not maybe in a happy state. Then he moves into section 2, which says that the presence of a higher, namely of the spiritual element, is essential to its perfection. So he's saying that, to quote, beauty is the mark God sets upon virtue. So he's saying that nature is beautiful and therefore it is good, it is virtuous because that is how God made it. Then he divides it down one more time into a third category, in which he says that nature can be viewed as an object of the intellect. So he's saying that we can look at it for knowledge. We look to the world for knowledge, to nature for knowledge. Then comes chapter 4, language, which he again breaks down into 3 sections. 1, words are signs of natural facts. 2, particular natural facts are symbols of particular spiritual facts. And 3, nature is the symbol of spirit. So in section 1, words are signs of natural facts, he kind of delves into the origins of words, like the etymology, and he looks at how right originally meant straight and wrong meant twisted. Spirit comes from the word wind, and transgression comes from crossing a line, which he then relates to using the heart to express emotion, the head to denote thought, and that thought and emotion are words borrowed from sensible things, as he describes them. They come from tangible things in nature. Then into section 2, particular natural facts are symbols of particular spiritual facts. So he says that every appearance in nature corresponds to some state of mind. Then in the third section, he talks about, it's very similar to the second section. He says that we are assisted by natural objects in the expression of particular meanings, which again is like the simile metaphor thing. He explains it using the exact kind of metaphor he's talking about. He says, we are like travelers using the cinders of a volcano to roast their eggs. So he says we're using nature, we're comparing things to nature to help with our understanding of those things. And then he takes it one step further and he compares nature as a whole to the human mind. I guess nature does change through the seasons, and so do people change as they grow and mature. Like it's a very interesting metaphor. Then we come to chapter 5, discipline. So he breaks it down into 2 sections. The overall for discipline is that things around us in nature and in society teach us lessons. So our experiences teach us. And then reason transfers all these lessons into its own world. So these experiences teach us, and we adapt that knowledge to fit what we know and to cover more bases, to get as much information out of that experience as we can. So the first section he creates, he says that nature is a discipline of the understanding and intellectual truths, by which he means like the sciences. So he specifically lists agriculture, astronomy, and zoology and physics at first. Then he kind of expands it to very specifics like light, heat, electricity, magnetism, physiology, and geology. He's saying that all of these things would not be possible without nature, which is very, very true. Agriculture is planting food, which is taking nature and putting it where you want it and growing it using water and fertilizer, which is all nature. Astronomy is the study of the stars, nature. Zoology is the study of animals. The other things he listed all have to do with very specific aspects of nature. And then in section 2, he brings it around to ethics as another study. Again, bringing it back to the idea that things change and things grow. And so why shouldn't we? Moving on to chapter 6, idealism. So he opens that chapter by stating that God will teach a human mind. And he compares that as a fact, similar to how there's the sun and the moon, and there's the home and work, like two very distinct settings in time and space, with very different behaviors associated with them. He also compares this to the difference between man and nature. And he talks about how this translates into poetry, how the poet is supposed to communicate that difference. The poet teaches by taking things like the land and the sea and making them revolve around the axis of his primary thought. And then he puts his new version out into the world to try and explain his thinking, which he compares to the philosopher, by saying that the poet delights us by animating nature like a creator, and he differs from the philosopher only herein that one proposes beauty as his main end and the other truth. So poetry is the pursuit of beauty and philosophy is the pursuit of truth. However, he does say that the true philosopher and the true poet are one. They should seek both truth and beauty because truth is beauty. Then he contrasts religion and ethics, saying that religion looks down on nature and diminishes the appeal of nature, because it suggests nature is dependent on a spirit. So, speaking about this, he says that religion includes the personality of God, where ethics does not. So, religion is very dependent on the ideas of this one figure, while ethics has many contributing people trying to find the right answers. They're all working together and trying to incorporate a wider variety of experiences. So he brings it all around. He brings everything together, saying that motion and poetry and physical and intellectual science and religion all affect our convictions of reality and the external world. He says that all cultures tend to imbue us with idealism. Like, all cultures teach you one thing and you begin to expect it. You become an idealist. And the advantage of this kind of idealism is that it presents the world in a way that's easier to digest. Into chapter 7, spirit. He says that nature is spirit, right? And he said this multiple times. But here he says that nature is religious. He says that the happiest man is he who learns from nature the lessons of worship. So he compares Mother Nature to a very devout religious woman who, she even looks religious, and she teaches lessons about religion rather than the church. Finally, we come to chapter 8, which says that the highest reason is always the truest. So, we have a lot more to learn about the world. that's not scientific, that's philosophical rather than scientific. We have a lot to learn that isn't just hard, cold facts that we can study and prove. We have a lot more nitty-gritty kind of philosophical debates to get in. He says we can learn these things by self-recovery and by healing as humanity and learning from our mistakes. And he says a big part of this healing is to look at nature and allow yourself to get lost in it. Near the end of nature, Emerson, I'd just like to read a couple parts of his ending. So shall we come to look at the world with new eyes. It shall answer the endless inquiry of the intellect, what is truth, and of the affections, what is good. The last few sentences of this essay I find very moving. He says, as when the summer comes from the south, the snow banks melt, and the face of the earth becomes green before it, so shall the advancing spirit create its ornaments along its path, and carry with it the beauty it visits, and the song which enchants it. It shall draw beautiful faces and warm hearts, and wise discourse and heroic acts around its way, until evil is no more seen. The kingdom of man over nature, which cometh not with observation, a dominion such as now is beyond his dream of God, he shall enter without more wonder than the blind man feels who is gradually restored to perfect sight. He ends with a message of hope for the future of humanity, that we can build that better future for our children, for the next generation, that we can bring new ideas and we can change the world. I would like to end with a poem by Transcendentalist Margaret Fuller, who is the editor and writes for the magazine The Dial. This is called My Seal Ring. Mercury has cast aside the signs of intellectual pride, freely offers thee the soul, art thou noble to receive? Canst thou give or take the whole, nobly promise and believe? Then thou wholly human art, a spotless, radiant ruby heart, and the golden chain of love has bound thee to the realm above. If there be one small, mean doubt, one serpent thought that fled not out, take instead the serpent rod, thou art neither man nor God. Guard thee from the powers of evil, who cannot trust vows to the devil. Walk thy slow and spellbound way, keep on thy mask or shun the day. Let go my hand upon the way. Which I just think is very beautiful, with, again, themes of nature and the beauty of nature. How we have to find our answers in nature. So that is my book review, my few favorite passages, and most important passages from the American Transcendentalists, Essential Writing, edited by Lawrence Buell. For more information and information on other topics, check out our website. And remember, we can do it.